tide. Oh, won't it be a tide? Oh, won't it be a tide? Oh, talking with the angels. Won't it be a tide? If you know it, you can help me. Say it one more time. I'll say, won't it be a tide? Oh, won't it be a
Shalom, saints, and blessings to you all in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Welcome to this episode of Un-Apologetics, the show where we are unapologetic about apologetics, and I am your host, CJ Cox. Want to, of course, say shaloms all around to anybody who is currently in the live chat joining us. If you are here, please remember to like and share this video and consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so. Hit that bell to get notified every time that we go live. Remember to leave any questions, comments, criticisms, concerns, critiques, anything like that in the comment section down below. If you'd like to follow us on various social media platforms, you can do so. I am on Minds, Parler, Gab, Facebook, Twitter, or Twix, or X, or whatever you want to call it. I don't really care. Truth Social, and probably something else that I'm forgetting. You can find me at the tag of the synagogue. If you're there, please remember to follow your boy and share this video to your account also. If you'd like to support the work that we do here, friends, there are numerous ways you can do that. You can give a one-time donation to our PayPal, link in the description below. You can subscribe to the Patreon, also link in the description below. If you subscribe for $5 monthly, then you actually get access to our breakfast tea video blog. It is exclusive to Patreon. Let me go ahead and get myself on the screen here today, friends. It is exclusive to the Patreon. We have bi-weekly content posted there, right? The last episode that we posted was on the idea of the incarnation, whether or not God had become human. Before that, we talked about the subject of quote-unquote Christian anti-Semitism, whether or not Christ is King is anti-Semitic. And before that, I don't really remember, but it's up there, and you'll be able to check it out. So yeah, that's $5 monthly for some extra content. Little thank you to you guys for deciding to pay for that, and it's a great way to support the channel here as well. You can also support the channel through super chat, super sticker, super thanks. Any and all super chats will be read and or answered so long as they are appropriate. So if you guys have questions for me or my guest, please do consider sending in the form of super chat. We certainly appreciate that. Also, you can purchase the book 15 Questions for Calvinists Answered. That is another way to get yourself something more tangible for your contribution. Link is in the description below. And lastly but not leastly, if you want to join as a channel member, you can also do that as well. Although I don't have any perks for that. So if you want to join some kind of a membership thing, honestly, I would recommend the Patreon. You're going to be spending just as much money, and you're actually going to get something for it. At any rate, we don't really have a whole lot in terms of channel housekeeping to go through. We don't have a whole lot planned. At least nothing set in stone at the moment. So we're going to go ahead and just jump right into a prayer for today. I'm looking at my my lovely bedhead. It's funny. Anyway, so let's just go ahead and jump into our prayer. And then I got a guest here today, friends, and we're going to have what I think will be another fascinating conversation here on the show. So let's go ahead and jump right into that. Heavenly Father, I want to thank you once again for the opportunities to have these videos. I want to pray for your guidance on this, Lord, and just pray that you guide us to be truth-seeking in this, edifying to your body, Lord, and glorifying to your name. In Jesus' name I pray, and we give you that glory. Amen. All right. We are going to go ahead and jump right on here. We are joined by my guest, Michael, the Canadian Atheist, who, of course, was just here about 2 weeks ago. Shalom, Michael. Thank you for being here.
Hey. Yeah, you keep inviting me back. I can't figure out why. But well, you know, it's good to be back. Yeah, well, maybe we should do like a series. We should just have like a regular thing where we chat. Hey everybody, my name is Michael. I'm half of the Canadian Atheist podcast. CJ will probably put the link to the cast in the chat or in the whatever in the YouTube notes. You can email me, the ca@rogers.com, or just go into a browser at the capodcast.ca. That'll take you there. We love having chats with people we disagree with.
Yeah, and there is a link in the description, by the way, friends. If you would like to check out Michael's podcast, the latest episode, which I believe was the 14th, was him and Digital Hammurabi, actually, both of them. So if you guys are interested in some of that, that is a interesting conversation. Of course, not a whole lot of agreement you're going to find on our side, but that's not always the point, right? Sometimes it's actually good to be listening to people you disagree with.
So but if you are interested, and thanks for talking about that, CJ. Yeah. So Josh Bowen has his PhD in Assyriology, and his wife Megan Lewis is also an Assyriologist, and they came on to talk about their latest book, and they're actually running a course right now. So if you're interested in learning ancient Hebrew, so if you want to actually be able to talk to people about this Bible stuff in the language, you can just Google Digital Hammurabi, or actually go to the YouTube episode and click on links there. They're actually teaching it, which is a very cool thing. And CJ Josh was telling me, so I asked him, I'm like, why? Like, I haven't seen you much at all this year. He's written 6 books this year.
Nice.
So yeah, he's been just a tad busy. And he's a great guy and a great friend to the show. And he is one of the people that I can pretty much guarantee every time I talk to him, I feel a little dumber because he's that smart. He's just that smart. So anyway.
Yeah, I had the last time I ever talked to him was quite a while ago at this point, but I had a debate with him. It was a tag team, actually. Me and Jonathan Sheffield, and him and Dr. Maggie Bryson. We were debating about whether or not the Exodus happened.
Oh, okay. Yep. And
to this day, I do think it is my most viewed debate. It was over on MythVision. It's like 23,000 last I checked. It's probably more than that now. And I won't lie to you. I have always felt rather cocky about that debate, not because I thought I won, but simply because it was cool to say pretty definitively I held my own against 2 people who were PhDs. And now I am at school, but at the time that was just random high school dropout Jay. So that was I've always been, I don't know if he sees it quite the same way, probably doesn't, to be honest, but I've always been pretty proud of that, if I can use the word pride in a positive sense.
I know that, like, I know in chats that we've had, because I mean we're friends outside of the YouTube community as well. Like, my wife and I went to DC last year, and we met up with him in where he lives in Maryland, and stuff like that. So we are friends outside of the digital world as well. And you have come up in conversation, and he's never spoken poorly of you at all. Of course, that's also not his style, right? But yeah, no, I think I would say he's got respect for you, and I would say that he's got even more respect for you pursuing higher education, because that's his deal, right? He likes to teach. Anyway, we can wax on Josh and Megan all day long, or we can tackle this totally non-controversial topics that we've come to talk about today.
Absolutely.
Did you want to finish off where we were last time before we delve into this week, or what?
Well, I think they do kind of dovetail well into each other. So for context for the audience, last time we were finishing off on kind of sexual revolution stuff and role of women, and not just role of women in so much as having distinct roles like gender roles, but also like the role they are playing in political society, in terms of like how they vote and stuff like that. Really sparked from a Joel Webbin comment, where he said, by and large, he thought women were dumb. And I'm barely exaggerating, honestly. That is really what he said.
Yeah. And this is so everybody who's watching this, if you type into a search engine Joel Webbin, women are dumb, video clips will come up and he says that there's no ambiguity in what he says, and I mean, hey, he's only insulting half the human race, right? What harm could possibly be done?
Right.
So yeah, and given that CJ and I are both married to, I think, what we would consider strong women.
Agreed.
It's not only is it incorrect, but can you get less charitable than that? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not really certain, and especially because as we were talking, I was saying I think this is probably what he means, and I do recall you saying something along the lines of like, okay, I disagree with that, but regardless, that's not what he said, and that was kind of the whole spark there. So with that though, let's kind of use that as a launching pad for what will essentially be this whole stream. Friends, will essentially all be about not just sexual revolution stuff, but really with an emphasis on abortion. That's what we're going to end up talking about here today. So let's use that kind of as a springboard for that conversation. I want to start by making the totally non-controversial statement that I do think there is a deep concern that people like myself have regarding what the female vote has gotten us. Now, I want to be clear when I say that I am not actually opposed to women voting. I am opposed to the way in which women have voted historically. It seems like, we from 1788 when we started to 1920 when women got the right to vote. For the most part, society was pretty well in line with the ideals that I would hold dear. Not always, of course. Like, for example, you did have Jim Crow laws and stuff like that, and that was very problematic. But by and large, I think in terms of culture, that was probably true. And whether this is the fault of the feminist movement or not, I tend to think it is. But since 1920, we have had sexual revolution. We have had legalization of no-fault divorce, which has led to a large increase in divorces, as well as a decrease in people being married, period. We have gotten to a point where we are paying for, at a taxpayer level, contraception, which I'm not opposed to people using contraception, but buy it yourself. We have the abortion issue, of course. We have the homosexuality issue. We have the most pornographic society, to the point where I think I can rather definitively say women are more sexualized in the feminist West than they have ever been in the history of the world. Which is deeply ironic, of course, because at least half of the feminist movement considers porn to be a cardinal sin. And so on and so forth. And by and large, I think women tend to vote in that direction, which is why I think it tends to be a problem with a result of the feminist movement, right? One thing you found in the 2024 election cycle, for example, on top of the fact that there was just a massive gender divide in terms of young men voting Trump and young women voting Kamala, which I hate them both, so whatever, that's not necessarily the point. But was what people were focused on, right? When you asked younger men, by which I mean under the age of 40, what was their number one concern in exit polls, by and large, you got economic questions, right? But when you asked young women what was their number one concern, by and large, you got abortion, which, of course, from my perspective, is homicide. So there is, while I am not here to say that we should repeal the 19th Amendment, that's not my argument. My argument is I do think that the result of the female vote, at least in America, has honestly been almost entirely negative. And yeah, that's of course a nice little stick of dynamite to throw into the conversation as we get this started.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember my mom telling me stories when I was, I guess, in my teenage years, how when I was born, I'm 54 now, so 1971, my mom, who worked, Not when we were very. I grew up with a bunch of siblings. There are 5 of us, so not when we were very young, but when we were old enough to kind of fend for ourselves. As a Gen X kid, that meant I had to be 5. I mean, I say that tongue in cheek, but almost not really. She worked full time. Made decent money, and couldn't obtain credit in her own name. Had to get my dad to sign off on her getting a credit card.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that's a problem. And I think it's interesting. The other thing that you said, and about, women being concerned about abortion. And I don't think that's surprising at all, especially given the climate in the US. See, one of the differences in Canada is there are no laws around abortion in Canada. It's just called healthcare. And because we have a single payer system, which we pay for through taxes, like nobody, it's just covered under healthcare, right? Reproductive health is just another stitch of healthcare. So there was talk a few years ago when Justin Trudeau was still prime minister about quote unquote legalizing abortion, even though there's nothing illegal about it in Canada. And basically he was told, don't do that. As soon as you make something a law, now there's a law to challenge. But because we have single payer universal healthcare and it's covered under healthcare, it's just covered under healthcare. So there's no law. And I'm a firm believer that when it comes to a woman's body, it should be made with her in consultation with her doctor. And if that woman feels that she wants to involve priest, pastor, rabbi, shaman in that process, have at it. Whatever. But I do believe it to be the woman's choice. I prefer the company of equals. And I view my wife, we've been married now for almost 20 years, together for 22, as my absolute equal in every way, shape, and form. We are partners in every way, shape, and form. And the thought of her having less than is abhorrent to me in every way, shape, and form. And so I think going back to what you originally said, just so there's no ambiguity in where I'm coming from, the idea of half of the population not having all of the rights is not okay. I've heard this, and I'm curious as to what you think about this, but because I've heard talking about this, people in reform circles, and I know that you are reformed, this idea of not the abolishment of the 19th Amendment, but this idea of household voting, which I view as kind of a slippery slope, and I'll tell you why. Simple yes or no question. As a Christian, you would see yourself, given what the Bible says, as the head of your household.
Yeah.
Right. So you'll when there's a decision to be made, and I'm saying I'm saying this simply because I think I also know you enough as a person, that if there was a weighty decision to be married, that you wouldn't just say, listen, I got this. I don't believe you do that. I don't believe you do that at all.
Yeah, we actually have a running joke in my house where my wife talks about because we do firmly believe in the idea of a patriarchal society. We're quite fundamentalist here, you might know. But my wife has a joke as far as what she calls my my head of household card. how she thinks I may have used it once or twice, and it was simply in matters where it's like, I have the money, so we need to live here because we can't afford something else. And I think that's the only time I've ever said, unfortunately, I just can't take what you're saying into consideration here. Beyond the fact of like, obviously, I want you to live here as well and be happy and stuff like. So that's not what I mean. But I just mean like in terms of like, she didn't really want the apartment that we had, but we couldn't afford another one. So it's kind of like, unfortunately, it's either here or nowhere. And beyond that, it's always been. So that's a long way of saying there is room for a. Here's one thing I will add, though, as well as a caveat. I think that, Scripture talks about wives submit to your husbands, and that is that's directed to wives. It's not husbands, lord things over your wives. And why I think that's important is because if you are to have a healthy patriarchal relationship, then it needs to be consensual, right? In other words, if I am to be head of household, it needs to be because my wife has already agreed within herself that that's what she wants to submit to. You know what I mean?
Well, I think, and therein lies the difference, right? It has to be like, if a woman is prepared and makes the decision of her own accord because the Bible also talks about the husband, being prepared to lay his life down, all these other things. Right. So like that, so there is give and take. I'm not going to pretend there isn't give and take. I was a Christian for a long time. So fair, fine. There's give and take. The idea of equal patriarchy just seems to be oxymoronic to me. But if there are two people, because it takes two to tango, right? And I don't care whether we're talking about a heterosexual couple or otherwise. If a couple is prepared, like they have a meeting of the minds and they are prepared to live in the way that you are saying you and your wife do, if there's enthusiastic consent, okay, you do you. But in the same way that enthusiastic consent also goes to this, I think like in the same way it applies to a sexual relationship, right? Any type of sexual contact requires vigorous consent, like enthusiastic consent from both parties. Otherwise, it's not okay. And that consent can be withdrawn at any time, right? I'm not okay with this anymore. Please stop. And both parties have to, you don't pump the brakes, you slam the brakes. So if there is that enthusiastic consent, have at it. I don't care, right? And there's a lot of this. There's a lot of talk sometimes about how there seems to be the thought that there's this objection from people who are politically opposed, that they don't want this type of thing. And to that, I would say I disagree with that. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have that. I'm saying that there has to be that type of enthusiastic consent. If that's what you're okay with, that's fine. But you can't expect the rest of society to agree in the same way, right? Like, I'm not going to live by your Christian standard because I'm not a Christian, right?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot to. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you do you. Like, if you want to do that, fine. If you want to, the same as if someone was, some type of, Orthodox Jew, and they wanted to, have intercourse through a sheet or something like that, you do you. I'm not doing the same. I'm not going to do the same thing.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot to kind of point out there. So the first thing, just because you started this with asking some of my thoughts on household voting, I tend to be very supportive of that idea. Now, part of the reason I support that idea, because you just heard me say earlier, I'm not necessarily saying I would take away women's right to vote, right? I don't think that that's wise. Part of the reason I like the idea of household voting is because it would not necessarily do that. For example, you are going to have single women or divorced women or widowed women who will end up being the head of their household, And
Sure.
as such, they would be the ones casting a household vote. Now, admittedly, that would be rarer. There's certainly no doubt about that. I think that by and large, if there's going to be a head of household, it will probably be the man of the house. That tends to be almost natural, I think.
Well, no,
But
I
it wouldn't
don't
be
think it's necessarily natural, but it's numeric, right? Like even if you look at percentages of non-heterosexual couples, right? Even if I wanted to be unbelievably generous, right? Non-heterosexual couples, I don't think there's any planet where you could say they make up more than, let's say, 20%. Okay.
right.
Simply by the numbers, there will be more heterosexual couples. Simply by the numbers.
Right.
That doesn't mean it's more popular. That just means it's more prevalent.
And part of the reason why, because somebody might ask, what's the benefit of a household kind of voting system? And there are really two main things that I would want to focus on. Number one, as I've shared with you before, and people on my audience may not have heard this as much, but I am skeptical of the idea of enfranchising many people. And we were just talking a little bit about this before the stream, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to get rid of voting, but I like the idea of voting being limited. There's an old comparison that somebody somewhere made, and I don't know who it was, so I can't give him credit or her credit, but the idea of you don't have a community meeting about your plumbing whenever there's a problem. You call a plumber, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that this person was trying to communicate was, so why do we have a community meeting about whether or not we're going to support the Ukrainian war effort, or what our tariff policy is going to be, or whether or not we are going to have this or that law as it pertains to guns? It just doesn't make any sense. You have a large portion of the population, and this isn't just true of America. I think this is just true of societies generally. That's really not. They're not informed, but what I'm really trying to say is I don't think they can be trusted with the vote. And I'd be the first to admit, by the way, that that's probably a nonpartisan issue. I'm biased, so I think it's probably going to be more of a partisan issue in one sense. But I know plenty of people who would vote Republican who I don't think should vote. I don't think they know enough to vote, Yeah. And so that's the first thing I do. Really quickly, though, the second thing, because I want to get your thoughts on both of these. It's not just the fact that I think that the vote should be limited to people who have an active stake in the game and who know what they're talking about. But it's also, the United States of America is a constitutional republic. Mm-hmm. One of the things that separates a republic from a pure democracy is this idea of representative voting, like the Electoral College, right? Or the legislature used to be the ones who would elect the senators and stuff like that, right? I kind of like the idea of the family unit being the smallest possible voting block and not the individual. So it's like you have a nesting doll of governments, right? Federal, state, city, family. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the Matryoshka dolls or whatever. Yeah. So no, it's interesting. I think something else that we should point out immediately is we're both wearing Star Wars shirts.
That is funny, actually. I didn't notice that.
Yeah. And actually my shirt, though it says Star Wars, has a picture of what your shirt says at the top of it, Millennium Falcon. But no, okay, so it's interesting. And for everybody who's not sure, if you look up CJ's Facebook page, and scroll back, I don't know, a month or so ago, he posted something about this, and I made some very long comments on it, and we have lots of back and forth like this, CJ and I. And it's sticky, right? So Canada's weird in this way, right? So you can drive at 16, vote at 18, drink at 19, except in Quebec because you can drink at 18. The numbers are all over the place, right? There's nothing uniform, and the back and forth we ended up having, and again, this is for people that are listening. The back and forth CJ I ended up having is, how do you come to some type of agreement, right? So I can tell you, based on what I do, that the human brain doesn't stop developing till around the age of 25, right? That's when all the wires are finally connected, so to speak. But I mean, 25, like I'm trying to think to myself, like I had 3 cars by the time I was 25. Right. And just to think that I can't drive until that age, like, but there is merit in some of what you're saying, CJ, in that some incredibly weighty issues like voting, right? That's a very weighty issue. You're talking about deciding who's going to make decisions, not only in your own country, state, say, or in our case, province, city, municipality, etc., to also how you're going to be represented on the world stages. That's a big deal. So it's not like I look at something like that. People talk to me like one of my favorite things to talk about is morality, and it's not black and white. There's this group called Live, and they wrote a song called "The Beauty of Gray," and the chorus basically goes, "We don't live in a black and white world. We need to learn to appreciate the beauty of gray." And so little of what we're talking about are these black and white issues. There's this vast array of gray in the middle. And when it comes to things like the age for voting or driving or drinking or serving in a military or becoming a police officer or being sworn, in as a lawyer, all these things, like there's too many variables, I think, to apply these strict ages to them. Simplistic as they might be, it might be overly simplistic to think about, okay, here's a cookie cutter age, right, that we can do these things with. Well, the other thing that you mentioned is the idea of the smallest voting block. That's fine until you have individuals who, I don't know, like every other individual on the planet, think that little bit differently, right? Now, we are more likely to be with people that we agree with, right? If I disagreed with more things than I agreed with my wife, we probably wouldn't be together. We probably never would have gotten together.
Right.
For you, I'm sure, right? So while it is likely that you will share ideologies, let's say household voting became a thing, or let's say you were going to vote on household voting. And you'd be like, well, I think that's a decent idea, right? Household voting blocks, smallest thing, blah, blah, blah. Okay, good. And your wife's like, sorry, I'm voting, right? The likelihood that you're going to agree on everything, I think, is very low. And this is where I think that problem where head of household comes in, and the problem where this voting block idea also comes in, because I think on paper it has a higher than zero possibility for success, but it doesn't have 100% chance for success. And as soon as you talk about because again, half the population, right? You're talking about basically neutering half of it. And I understand that from a perspective, well, as a Christian, a patriarchal type of viewpoint I get it. Again, I was Christian a long time. But it cannot be fair to everyone.
Well, and let me kind of, because to a certain extent, I think that's actually true, which may surprise some people that I'm not going to defend the quote unquote fairness of it, because there is a large extent to which that is true. I think that, by and large, and we can even just say, forget the by and large idea, we can just say in CJ's little potential perfect world, right? Obviously, if the world was perfect, everybody would be a Christian because everybody would agree. And I'm talking from my perspective, of course, right? Not because people are forced. And that would therefore mean a biblical literalism in most instances, but not in all instances. and yada yada and so on and so forth. Okay, in that perfect world, it does seem like the fairness politically to women would be almost negligible. Granted, I do think there are a couple considerations that for me make me think that's worthwhile, right? So the first thing is I tend to think that so you talk about this idea of like we have the wife one way and the husband wants to go another way, right? Which of course could and will happen. In fact, I can share, I'm comfortable sharing this with the audience now because it's no longer the case. But up until about 2 years ago, I was married to an atheist. Now, I didn't get married to somebody else. She converted, right? And that was, if anyone's curious, that was 100% of her own free will, of course, right? But I've been married since 2018, and I've been with her since we were both 15 years old in 2013. So, that was a decade of my significant other being an atheist, and it was about 7 years, well, probably closer to 5, of my significant other being a progressive, right? So now that ended up changing over time, and so I can only speak about this in the past tense. However, hypothetically, were there to be household voting in 2018, the year we got married, there would be a significant amount of disagreement there, even still at that point. Had it been in 2016 when we got engaged, yes, I did get engaged at 18. Get married young, guys. Obviously, don't rush it, but it worked out for me, so I'm biased.
Do what's right for you.
Yeah, it worked great for me. I know it doesn't work for everybody, so maybe ignore my advice there. But there'd be even more disagreement at that point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like at this stage, 2025, my wife is significantly more pro-life than I am. In 2016, she was pro-choice. So you can see the evolution there, right? Now, if we were both voting in 2016 and it was household voting, or if we were both debating in 2016 and it was household voting, then yeah, there would be a significant disagreement there. I grant that.
Yeah.
That being said, I think that, and this is going to probably, reveal a little bit about underlying philosophies in each of these things. But I don't think it's good when there is that kind of political discontent within the family unit. Now, because individuals are individuals, there is always going to be differences of opinion. Even today in 2025, me and my wife still disagree about certain things, although she tends to be to my right these days, if you can believe it. But I don't know if that's, when it comes to some of the larger issues, I don't know that that's a positive thing. And in fact, I don't think most marriages can even withstand that. See, when you have individualized voting and you have two people who vote against each other, you have two different problems. Number one, the husband and the wife's vote essentially cancel each other out, right? If 100%. I'm voting Republican and she's voting Democrat, then essentially you have no votes.
Yep.
Because it's one each, right?
Yeah.
And if they both vote,
unless it was gauged by popular vote, then you'd have one for one side and one for the other.
Well, exactly, right. But in an electoral system, and that is a fair point. This is a uniquely American problem because we don't do the
yeah. See, in Canada, we run a first past the post system, so it would actually like no votes are canceled out.
Right. And in the case of both of them voting for the same person, now all you've done is doubled the winning vote or potentially doubled the losing vote. But again, it still has this. You still have this idea of the electoral, so you're going to run into that same problem. But then the second issue is it divides what I think should be a united unit, and causes a level of discontent within that unit that I think a lot of marriages are not able to withstand. I think that you saw a lot in America, at least, and it wasn't like a massive amount, but it was enough to make a statistical blip of people who their marriage could not withstand the election of Donald Trump, right? Now, again, I'd like to point out, I didn't vote for the guy. I don't particularly like him as a conservative. I think he is decidedly not that, and I also think he's kind of a POS. That being said, if I had voted for him, it bothers me that there are women out there that in a hypothetical world I could be married to who would be so distraught over the idea that we have that disagreement that they might be willing to ruin that family unit over it. And to be fair, I'm sure there are men as well, but the stories you tend to only see the women who left, and there is a pretty big gender divide between who voted Kamala and who voted Trump, and likewise who voted Clinton and who voted Trump. Maybe that's also because they were both women. I don't know. But I do think Trump is particularly offensive to women also, given some of his comments.
Oh, he's repellent. I think he's repellent to everyone, except his fan base. No, it's interesting. I don't think I disagree with what you said as far as the family unit goes. I also think that it's like, I think it's uncommon for you to see that type of disconnect and still any type of real unity. I will also say to everybody who's listening, I knew that Jay used to be married to an atheist a long time ago. He shared that secret with me many years ago, and I kept it. Now I'm glad I don't have to keep it anymore. Because we had finished, this has got to be 5 years ago, Jay.
At least, yeah.
Yeah. And we had finished, we had done, I don't know whether we had done a debate together or against each other, but you know what I mean, together, or whether it was one of our chats like we're having now. But CJ and I tend to have this thing where we have just this ability to talk for long periods of time. And so the recording had stopped, and we probably talked an hour after that. And he shared two things with me. He said, one, I don't know if you know this, but I'm Jewish. I don't think you were public with that yet either. And you also said that, that your fiance at the time was an atheist. And you said, please keep that to yourself. And I never told a soul. I'm glad I don't have to keep that secret anymore. But I do think you're right in that that's going to cause, a great degree of discontent. From a personal perspective, faith was not the determining, but it was a factor in the breakup of my first marriage. It wasn't the determining, but it was a factor. And when my current wife and I were getting, very early on in dating, it was one of the things that came up. And she very much believes as I do. She's not as vocal as I am. She's what I sometimes refer to as an apathy, like an apatheist, where she's just like, I don't believe, I don't care. Just don't come to me with that. Just do your thing and leave me alone. That's as much as she likes to get involved in it. Whereas I am not that way. But yeah, that would of course be a problem. And I think, from a Christian perspective, you certainly wouldn't be equally yoked, right?
Right.
Biblical term. So yeah, that's going to be, and I think if you were ever in consultation with, whether it was the male or the female or whatever have you, whether it be same sex or heterosexual, if either one of them were under the authority of a pastoral figure, that would come up. And you would probably, depending on what denomination you're talking about, you'd probably see some perhaps undercurrent, if not overt, is this the right thing to do considering you guys believe so differently, types of conversations happening. Which is why I don't think the idea of limiting half of I've some of you may not be aware, I keep pythons, and one of my pythons is hissing rabidly in the corner right now. So that's what's drawing my attention away every once in a while. So limiting to half the population, that's why I think that's a bad thing. If you had individuals, again, you're not going to be lockstep in everything. So I think, because you won't be lockstep in everything, the ability or the idea of limiting a vote to a household isn't a problem until it is, and then it really is.
Yeah, and like I said, there's a level of agreement that I do have with that, in so much as that I grant that individuals will always be individuals, and they're going to have differences of opinion. So I'm not trying to avoid that, because it's a sacrifice I think that I'm definitely willing to make. But I think a area that will help kind of explore not just this idea, but also what we were trying to finish off of in the last episode was as it pertains to the topic of abortion, right?
Yeah.
And that very fascinating discrepancy between exit polls, what was women's primary concern in voting, and what was and particularly young women and young men's primary concern in voting in the exit polls of 2024. And it was primarily economy for men.
Mm-hmm.
Things like inflation, excuse me, tended to be a really big deal. Things like the price of gas tended to be a very big deal. And I believe, if I remember correctly, it was something like 50% for women. It was something like 50% of them said their number one important area of importance was abortion. Right now, I think there's actually two separate problems there from my perspective. The first problem being the idea that for young men, it seems to be whether or not they can take care of their children, and for young women, it seems to be whether or not they can kill them. And I understand that there's going to be a difference of opinion there that we're going to get into, and I probably said that in the least charitable way possible, but I also kind of did it on purpose. But then secondly, even if you don't grant the way I view abortion, it's still like if I granted the way you view it as this being like a right being taken away, I could imagine a scenario in which I feel like some of my rights might be trampled upon, and that might be the lesser problem. Like, for example, I think that red flag laws are a really bad idea, right? Which are red flag laws are basically certain red flags have been raised about an individual. We come in, we take his right to take a firearm, and then we take him to court to see whether or not that can hold. I think that's a bad idea. If we had a choice between that idea and the idea that we were going, and I'm going to use a reductio here, so I understand these two things aren't comparable, but just bear with me. That idea and the idea that we're going to invade Canada. It'd be like, okay, well, I can live with not having rights if it means I'm not going to war with an ally. Like, if that's the option, So in the self-same way, it's like, I feel like the economy is a much bigger problem than whether or not you have an unfettered right to an abortion. And it's important to add that word unfettered, because there isn't a single state in the union that actually restricts all abortion. The strictest laws, which you'll find in Oklahoma and I believe in Alabama, are 6-week bans, right? Which means before 6 weeks, and they tend to carve out exceptions for rape and incest and threat to the mother as well. So that is, I think, an example of where it's like, I think that kind of discrepancy could be very much limited by something like household voting. And on top of that, I think that it's a uniquely single woman problem, at least by the demographics. Married women don't tend to really want to support abortion. Now, of course, there are plenty of married women who do, but I'm talking about as a general demographic rule. It tends to be single or divorced women who are really big on the idea of getting abortions. And I find that to be very problematic. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I don't think I know a woman in my personal life that doesn't support a woman's right to choose. Now, again, lest I be misunderstood, I think people watching this, they will either cock their head to the side when I say what I'm about to say, or their head will explode when I finish what I'm going to say. I am personally pro-life. I think less abortion is better. My pro-life stance is only overshadowed by my pro-choice stance. And what I mean by pro-choice is a woman's right to choose what happens. Now, CJ and I have talked about this before, and so I think he probably already knew what I was going to say when I said that. There may come a time when medical science has advanced enough that a woman discovers at 8 weeks that she is pregnant. Medical science will eventually advance to the point where they have the capacity to extract that, and at 8 weeks is not even a fetus. It's not much more than a somewhat large clump of cells. Extract that and put it in some type of artificial womb. I am the same age as the first IVF, in vitro fertilization, babies that were successfully born in Canada, 54. So one day that will be able to happen. I think that will be better. I think less abortion is better. But I'm not prepared to try to tell any woman what they have the capacity to do with their body, especially because of some of the major issues that can happen. To give a couple examples, CJ, you've said before that you're like an abortion abolitionist.
Yeah.
Right. Are there any exceptions to that whatsoever?
The one exception I would give, because I think you don't have a choice but to take some life, is in a case where it's not even take some life, it's really save some life. In a case where there is a threat to the mother's life, you have to choose to save one of them or save none of them. I think that unfortunately you got to play a trolley game at that point. And that's just the reality. You either have two dead bodies or one dead body. Yeah. Beyond that, no.
Right. So what CJ is referring to is an ectopic pregnancy.
Exactly.
Or a tubal pregnancy, right? Non-viable in 100% of the cases. Please, people, if you're watching this, there are a couple of stories floating around about somebody in the southern United States that carried a tubal pregnancy. It's not true. 100% of tubal pregnancies are non-viable for fetus, and in almost every case will end up in a fallopian tube rupture that will kill the parent as well. So yeah, that's just a non-starter, right? So we agree with that. I gathered some startling statistics in preparation for today. So in the US, there are somewhere around 3.5 to 3.8 million pregnancies per year. Do you find that statistic to be about on par?
So I haven't looked up that direct number. I did look up how many new kids there are each year, which of course is not going to account for maybe some of those that might end in a miscarriage or abortion. And that sounds about right. Yeah.
Okay. So, some of this I can talk to with a fair amount of experience, given that my current wife and I, we spent approximately $100,000 on IVF. Because as it turns out, my wife's not able to have children. I do have a daughter that came from my first marriage, who's now a grown adult, who's actually almost CJ's age. But anyway, we spent $100,000 on IVF. My wife had 4 miscarriages. We found out that she's not able, there's a genetic egg abnormality. She cannot have children. And we know, so anyway, so I have a little bit of experience with this. Approximately somewhere between 15 and 20% of all recognized pregnancies. So that's either a positive blood test or urine test. Approximately 15 to 20% of those pregnancies end in spontaneous abortion from the mother's body simply recognizing that there's a problem, like with my wife, for example, happened 4 times, and just going, nope, sorry, this isn't working. We're just going to cut this. We're going to cut this. So there are lots of times where the body just says, no, this isn't working, stuff like that. So, I mean, there's lots of abortions happen. A lot of times, even without the mother even knowing that it happened. And so another startling statistic that I found, that there's approximately, I couldn't find a US statistic for this, but there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 73 million abortions worldwide per year. Mm-hmm. Funny enough, I couldn't find a US statistic for that.
Our numbers tend to hover around, on the low end, which was like in the mid 2010s, there was about 900,000 per year. The high end, which is recently actually since Roe v. Wade, the number has risen. Or since Jackson v. Dobbs, rather, since we repealed Roe v. Wade. And it's just over 1 million.
Okay. Okay, 1 million. Like I said before, that's terrible. Like, I wish that wasn't the case. Somewhere around in the US, somewhere between 25 and 30,000 cases per year are due to sexual assault. Terrible, obviously. Approximately 1% are the ectopic that I talked about. So that's around 16,000, but that's worldwide. An incest, terrible to think about, is somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 per year. I don't imagine you'd like, would you, so I guess I just have to ask you outright. Would you restrict a woman's access to an abortion who was raped?
Well, I'll give you the straightforward answer first and then explain. The straightforward answer is yes. Now, let me give the explanation as to why. So I think, now I want to be clear, I think that is a horrible, horrible thing. We have a Supreme Court case here in the States, Coker v. Georgia, that says you are not allowed to administer the death penalty in cases of rape, and I find that to be a horrible decision. I think that's really, with the sole exception of murder, it might be the very worst thing that you can do to somebody.
I think it's actually in cases worse than murder.
In a lot of ways, it can be, because at the very least, with the murder, there's no lifelong psychological damage afterwards, right?
Yeah.
And especially because there is very real psychology behind the idea that sex is like an inherent part of a woman's essence in a way that is not really true about men. And when I use that word essence, I'm not talking so much esoterically as much as I am like women define themselves a lot by their sexuality in a way that is much different than the way men do, right?
I would say some do, not all. It's very dangerous to cast broad nets when it comes to stuff like that. So I would say some, not all.
While that's certainly fair, I'll say, we'll put it this way, as a general rule, right? And the reason that's important in this case is because it means a lot of women, whether society views them this way or not, and it is unfortunately the case that some societies do, but even in societies where they are not viewed this way, a lot of women will consider themselves to be almost like used goods after they've been sexually assaulted, which is horrible. That's a terrible, terrible thing to think about yourself, right? Especially considering the fact that you had no control over it. Like, it's a horrible thing to think regardless, but the fact that you also had literally no control over what happened to you makes it that much worse, right? So that, I point that out just to say, like, look, when a case like this happens, I am all for. In fact, I'm not just for. I'm like a stamp of approval 1,000 times over executing rapists.
Okay.
I don't think, though, when it comes to a situation when we talk about, like, what from my perspective is executing babies, it's like, okay, but he or she, the child in question, is not the one who committed the crime. And ultimately, if the woman is not capable for psychological reasons of raising her rapist child, which I understand, I think I think a lot of women have raised those children and have come to see, like turning air into gold kind of idea, where it's like, this is a wonderful thing that happened, even if the way it happened is terrible.
I'd say maybe wonderful result, not wonderful that it happened.
Yeah, and that's a better way to put it for sure. But there is always the possibility of adoption, of giving a child up to a orphanarium, of maybe to another family member, or to a church, or to one of the drop-offs that you have in like fire departments and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And actually, it leads me to this. I want to show you this argument that I've formulated.
Sure.
Real quick, because it I think casts light on what it is that I'm trying to point out here. So this is my little syllogism, if you will, for abortion, right? P, for those who are not aware, means premise, so it's P1, P2, P3, and C means conclusion, okay? So P1, the deliberate taking of innocent human life is always immoral given any reasonable alternative. I have to add the given any reasonable alternative aspect there because it's hard to argue that like somebody in a war is necessarily not innocent. Obviously, you guys are both just doing your duty in that case. But you also don't really have you can't just be like, look, peace and love, man, when a guy's aiming an AK-47 at your face with full intent to kill. Premise 2, the human fetus is human, of course. Premise 2, the fetus is alive. Premise 4, or 3 rather, fetus is alive. Premise 4, the fetus is innocent. Premise 5, abortion ends the life of a human fetus. And premise 6, there are always reasonable alternatives to abortion. Abstinence, which of course would not count for a sexual assault, but adoption would. Raising the child would, contraception would, and I added etc. there, but you could list some of the other things I mentioned here as well, like orphanarian and stuff like that. And the conclusion here that I have is abortion is immoral in all cases. And by the way, when I say all, I would even say that does include threat to the mother's life. It just so happens to be the case that sometimes you don't have a moral option. Like for example, I think taking human life is wrong. In every case, it is not ideal. And at the same time, if you broke into my house and started threatening my wife, I'm going to kill you. You know what I mean? I have a firearm. I have the right to do that. If it's her or you, sorry, buddy, it's got to be this hypothetical you who breaks into.
Yeah, it's not something that I at the very least I can appreciate the stance where you're not necessarily saying that it's moral immoral, but it might still be immoral. And I might even agree with you on that point, but I would say that it's morally justifiable.
Exactly, right? It's like because of the fact that you only have the bad option and the worse option, you got to take the bad.
Yeah, see, it's interesting. Like I had this discussion. It's funny, you were the first one to mention trolley problem. A few years back, I had a discussion. I hate calling them debates, but I had a discussion with, I'm sure some of you are familiar with a guy named Praise I Am.
Yeah.
And
unfortunately,
we
sorry.
Anyway, he brought up the idea of the trolley problem, right? And I told him like the trolley problem is terrible either way.
Yeah, it sucks. Exactly.
Like there is no good answer to the trolley problem. And if you say there's a good answer to the trolley problem, I don't want to know who you are.
Yeah.
Because they're both terrible options. But given the the idea of being faced with that, I hope I would have the intestinal fortitude to cause the least amount of harm, which I think is what you're referring to.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd still go home and cry myself to sleep because I knew that I took an action, regardless of whether throwing the lever or not throwing the lever. I would still view not throwing the lever. So if not throwing the lever meant that one was killed, like the kind of the opposite of what the trolley problem actually is, but I would still view that non-action as an action that I was responsible for, and I'd still feel terrible about it. So
yeah, and I'd even point out too, I fully grant that this would be a real moral dilemma for you. So don't think I'm being dismissive.
I don't.
But I think for those of us who take the position that morality is objective and absolute, it shocks me how often someone will say, because a much smaller version of the trolley problem is the whole lying to the Nazis at your door issue, which is
I've used that many times. I've used that many times.
Yeah, and it blows my mind how many people who will affirm an objective morality will just say without caveat, it is not immoral to lie to the Nazi. Now, for the record, I think you do lie to the Nazi, and that 100% of the time, I think that is the right action to take. But you can't consistently tell me that morality is absolute and lying is evil, and then also tell me that that is not an immoral action. What you can consistently tell me is you don't have a moral action, so you take the one that is most moral, that preserves life in this instance, as opposed to preserves honesty, which I think life is of much greater value than whether or not you're being honest.
In fact, I had this conversation years back with Andrew Rappaport from the YouTube channel Striving for Eternity. And I can't remember whether it was when I was on his YouTube channel or whether he came on, because he came on the podcast as well. Mm-hmm. But I posed that dilemma to him. he said he would not lie to the Nazis.
Funnily enough, actually, that's Immanuel Kant. Now, he's not a Christian, but Immanuel Kant actually said that same thing. And now he wasn't talking about Nazis. He was talking about a murderer, but tomato, tomato, right?
Yeah.
And that also kind of blows my mind too, because it's like, I understand the desire to be consistent, but now you have a different problem, which is that you have neglected what I think are much weightier measures. If morality truly has an absolute value, and which I understand, I'm speaking from my perspective here, not necessarily yours, granted, but it's almost like, I like to compare it to like a $1 bill and a $5 bill. If two moral actions have absolute value, then I should be able to determine which one has greater value than the other, right?
Yeah.
5 is an objectively bigger number than 1. And likewise, preserving life is an objectively more important thing. Preserving especially innocent life is an objectively more important thing than whether or not you're honest.
Yeah. And that's where it's interesting. So I am not a moral absolutist. And I remember had a conversation. It just feels like I'm name dropping all over the place. I'm not meaning to. I had a conversation when I was having a conversation with Matt Slick some time ago. Because I had told, like, Matt makes this argument. He's become somewhat famous for what I'm about to say. He will commonly say it is always wrong to torture a baby merely for one's own personal pleasure. He's become somewhat famous for using that line. And I agree that I believe that statement is a moral fact. But I am not a moral objectivist. And that's because it becomes more nuanced for me in that if you look at the standard definitions of objective versus subjective, objectivity would dictate the absence of a mind or an opinion. And that cannot be the case, I think, when it comes to morality. So when it comes to saving the Jews that are hiding in my attic, or flipping the switch and sacrificing 1 and saving 5, or or choosing to terminate a pregnancy result of a sexual assault, right? I would look at all of those things as degrees of immoral, but with different levels of moral justification.
Mm-hmm. Now, and I like that you tied that back then, Joar, because then for me, now this ties back to this issue of would you restrict the right of a woman to get an abortion in cases of rape? And of course, I answered yes, right? Because in my opinion, I think that the weightier measure there, and this isn't even just in abortion issue per se, it's more of a general moral rule of mine. I think the weightier issue will almost always go towards preserving innocent life. I can imagine some scenarios where that might not be the case. I think, for example, it can be oftentimes nearly impossible to completely eliminate collateral damage in terms of war, which is part of the reason war is so horrible.
I'm a pacifist, so yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, and while I am not a pacifist, I will say I think that you should take virtually every step possible, every step reasonable, I should say, before you go to war, because war is
that's more what I mean. Like you completely empty the chest of ideas before you do it.
Exactly.
So that there is no other option. And it's interesting because I think so. Given a woman who had suffered an assault, and it turns out that she became pregnant as a result of which, I think if that woman came to me, not that any woman should, looking for guidance, but if that woman came to me and asked, what should I do? I would ask her what she thinks is best. I think I would try to tell her that, an abortion, there's no intelligent argument against the fact that an abortion is the termination of a potential human life. Now, I'm careful in what I say, because just because someone gets pregnant doesn't mean they're going to go to term and deliver a viable child. That's not necessarily the case. We know that lots of things can happen. everything from an umbilical cord being around the neck to a myriad of issues, right? So we know it's at least the potential of a human life. There's no intelligent argument against that. An abortion is the intentional termination of a potential human life. I think I would try my best to talk to her about not doing it. Because again, like I said before, I like the idea of less abortion. But my persuasion would stop either at her saying, I'm not interested in your opinion anymore, because that's a conversation ender. Or, thank you, but I'm going to do X, Y, or Z. And I'm not prepared, and I wouldn't want the ability to impose my will on someone else like that. And while I don't necessarily like that, I have to side with that. I can't morally reconcile taking someone else's ability to choose away from them because of what I happen to believe and projecting onto somebody else.
So, and this is where I think there are a couple things that come to my mind immediately. First of all, I want to ask, given this syllogism in front of you.
Well, I stop at P1.
You stop at P1? So that's, and by the way, that is in my opinion, that is the only rational premise that one can reject, because the human fetus is tautologically human. We know it's alive. Obviously, it hasn't committed a crime in a court of law, and we all know that an abortion ends it.
I agree to all those. In fact, you could make, if you really wanted to dive into the moral weeds, you could make the argument that the egg and the sperm are alive before they ever came together.
You could. I don't think you can make the argument that they are necessarily human, right? In the same way that like an egg that is unfertilized at the store, people often say you eat a baby chicken. Well, actually, you don't. It's unfertilized.
Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's only got half the DNA, right? Like
right.
Your sperm has your chromosomes.
Exactly.
The egg has the mother's.
Yeah, and I guess you could also try to reject P6. There are always reasonable alternatives, but I just think that you'd have to make the case then that like adoption or abstinence or raising the child or things like that are not reasonable alternatives, and that's very difficult to do.
The problem with P6 is reasonable to whom? Right? Because to you, carrying and then giving for adoption is a perfectly reasonable alternative. To you, that is reasonable. It doesn't necessarily mean it's reasonable to somebody else.
Yeah, and I will say I think that while there is some ambiguity in the word reasonable, I think that it would be very difficult, in my opinion, to argue that like adoption is unreasonable.
I don't think adoption is unreasonable.
Right, exactly, right. And I don't think most people do. I think even people who point out, and there are, by the way, I'm not dismissing these. I think people who point out ad nauseum the problems in the foster care and adoption systems still think it is a reasonable. Obviously you have to do something with orphans, and preferably the less psychological damage you can do to them, the better, right? By the way, guys, if you're listening to this, consider, even if it's just a small donation, helping out your local orphanarium because they need it. At any rate, so P1 is, I think, the most logical premise to reject. I also think it's the most morally damaging one to reject, though, because if we grant the deliberate taking of innocent human life is not always immoral, well, now you open the floodgates for not just the abortion issue, but a ton of issues. I mean, is it immoral to?
Is that I'm not saying I disagree. I'm not saying I did like, but I disagree with the formation of the premise in and of itself, right? Because it's potential, right? Because like we would agree that conception doesn't mean delivery.
No, but I do think it does mean human life, right? Like I think you can take
it means potential human life, not guaranteed human life.
Well, so this is where I think we would have a slight definition in terms, because when I look at the you could take the DNA, it's very clearly human,
Yeah.
right? And it is, the fetus is alive, if not born. And what we mean there is, if we look at
It's alive.
now,
Sure. Yeah.
so when we say potential human life, you might even say, like, I recently had it's not really a debate, it was more of a discussion with a good friend of mine, Colton Carlson, who is a Christian, but who thinks that, like, going beyond a 6-week ban is, and of course, I don't know if you would even necessarily, it seems to me you probably would not be okay with a 6-week ban, but that's kind of his limit, where he's like, look, anything beyond that, I think we're going too far. And his argument primarily relies on, like, fetal personhood. But to me, personhood is almost an irrelevant argument, because it's like, we know that it's alive scientifically, and we know that it's a human scientifically. So while we can say potential human personhood, which I think is probably more what you're getting to, we can't make an argument it's not a human life at conception, because scientifically that's just a given. You know what I mean?
I wouldn't dispute that at all. What I would say is, again, potentiality versus necessarily. And the other thing that we haven't the other thing that we hadn't touched on yet, and this is something that there isn't, I want to be clear, there isn't scientific consensus on this. And that is, when I look at harm, when I look at morality, I look at the reduction of harm to the best of our ability and the promotion of flourishing to the best of our ability. And there are a ton of off-roads and caveats through that that would take hours to delve through here. But if I take that just in hand, so the reduction of suffering to the best of our ability, I would insert the caveat, like, for example, I'm not going to tell someone or take away someone's ability to choose, right? But I would stand beside you and say that if, for example, and this would not happen, I'm using a grossly weird example.
Right.
If a woman at 8 months went to her doctor and said, change my mind, get it out, do whatever you got to do, I don't care, right? I would stand beside you and call that woman a monster. Because, one, at 8 months, you have a completely viable baby, right?
Yeah, at that point, you can just take them out, right? Like,
yeah, you could just induce labor at that point,
yeah,
right? And whatever medical means that is, whether cesarean, like whatever, you could deliver a baby and it would survive just fine. Mm-hmm. I would stand beside you and call that person a moral monster. To be clear, that's never happened. No one is doing that. But there's this idea of, in order for me to be honest and true to myself, is to look at the capacity for pain and suffering. Going back to what I said before, is there is no scientific consensus on when a fetus has the capacity to feel. There is documentation, like the central nervous system starts to develop around 3 weeks, right? But the synapses don't start to fire until about 12, right? And if you look at the way that synapses and alleles and everything form in the brain, that's basically as the connections begin to, or as the pieces begin to make their connections in order for all those things to start happening. And
quickly to your point, which of course I'm going to probably disagree with the point when it's completed, but to your point, the closest thing you have to consensus is, I think that most doctors agree that it's at least by 24 weeks, but when it actually starts, I don't think they necessarily know.
Oh, I think it's actually earlier than that. Like I tried to dig into it a little bit, and I could find no consensus anywhere, whether it be from PubMed or anywhere else.
Right.
It varied based on the formation of the central nervous system to the connecting and firing of the synapses to the completion of the spinal cord, all those other different things. All that to say, my preference would always be to limit suffering as much as possible. So the majority of abortions that take place before that time. Like let's say I wasn't going to be charitable and use your 24 weeks. if you look at the percentage of abortions that take place prior to 24 weeks, it's probably high 90s, right, in percentage.
Yeah.
So like I would go to the reduction of harm as much as possible. If there, for example, after possible conception, but the morning after pill, for example, right? There's nothing more than even the possibility of a small handful, a dozen or less cells at that point. There's no suffering. There's no suffering at that point whatsoever. You know, as an embryo, it's not even an embryo at that point, it's a blastocyst, starts to make its way down the fallopian tube to implantation in the uterine wall. There's nothing going on there. There hasn't even begun the pulsation for a heartbeat yet. Funny enough, there's a heartbeat before there's actually blood. But even that hasn't started to happen yet. So miss me with the, oh, you're causing harm, because you're not. But how would you feel about the morning after pill? I know we're kind of jumping all over the place. I apologize. My brain's scattered today.
No, you're good. So the morning after pill, I'm not 100% sure about. I think if my understanding of Plan B is correct, I think what it actually does is it prevents the attachment necessary for a full conception.
Yeah, you may be 100% right in there. So then in that case, it's a non-starter from the get-go. It's not even there's no implantation. Yeah.
And I'll put it this way: I don't love I don't love contraception, period, but I don't love female contraception because of some of the effects it has. I don't think it should be illegal though. When I say I don't love it, it's more like I think in my personal life, I don't love the idea of being able to have free and loose sex without the potential consequences that naturally arise from sex. At the same time, though,
I thought you were going in a slightly different direction there. I don't like the idea of female contraception because I don't like the health hazards to the woman.
Well, let me be very clear.
Yeah.
So that what I just said is my reason for not liking contraception, period, including condoms. What you just said is my reason for particularly not liking female contraception, because it's essentially a pesticide that you just ingest, which is like, that can be very, and a lot of women, some of whom I even have known, have had lifelong medical issues as a result of birth control and stuff like that. Plan B notwithstanding. So
I'm not a fan. So would you? Okay, so here's an interesting question then. Let's try to tie it back to the trolley problem. Both are terrible, right? But would you view the morning after pill as less terrible? And so by that point, still permissible?
You mean than an abortion, right?
No, yeah, exactly. Well, yeah. So you don't want to have abortion, okay? But the morning after pill, since we know there's no implantation, yes, there was still sex involved. Whether it was, it could have been a broken condom for all, like, who knows, right? There could have been two people could have decided to get together and have sex, take precautions, like use a condom, right? But the condom broke. It does happen. It's pretty rare, but it happens.
Right.
And the one's like, okay, time to go to Plan B. Would you, because we agree that the trolley problem is terrible both ways, would you look at that as the less terrible option?
I would, because in that instance, especially if my understanding of what Plan B actually does is correct, you're essentially weighing what I would see as the taking of a human life over and against the potential poisoning of yourself, but it is only potential. You don't have that, right? A lot of people take Plan B without any harm, and you consented to that, which is one area here that I think is a major concern as well, right? Like when we talk, people will often compare abortion to like euthanasia, for example. And I think you and I would probably both agree that, like, if you killed a 80-year-old man in a way that was not, that involved no suffering whatsoever, because they were suffering from some disease or something like that, but without that man's consent, that would be a problem.
Yeah, that's still murder. Yeah,
exactly.
That's still murder. But see, it's weird. Because you start to move into, in Canada, we have something called MAID, or medical assistance in dying, of which I am a proponent of. I think if you have the right to live, you have the right to not live.
Well, and that's even, and by the way, I won't share my full thoughts on that, but the reason I worded that the way I did is because I'm even granting the possibility, just for the sake of argument, that euthanasia could be moral given certain circumstances. But everybody would agree, at least I shouldn't say everybody, most people would agree it's not immoral in cases where the soon-to-be deceased did not consent to it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, every non-psychopath would agree with you.
Exactly. And then we can say that one fairly definitively. Which adds another element then to this whole thing. If we can grant from a scientific perspective that the fetus is a human life, whether or not it's a human person or whether or not it has pain receptors or those things notwithstanding. Another element you could add to here, and maybe I could even add it to P1, the deliberate taking of innocent human life without its consent is always immoral. Just to further, preface against that, because that, and to take this back to this idea of the reason I bring it up when you talk about Plan B is because if any negative effect that comes as a result of Plan B upon the woman, she did consent to by way of taking it, right? Like when I take a Tylenol, it's got all the, hey, this may cause all this stuff, and I consent to that because I don't want my headache or I want to reduce my fever or whatever. Maybe I want to give my kid autism if Robert F. Kennedy is to believe. But that's a joke. Sorry, it was a terrible joke because I think that's stupid. But at any rate.
All right.
So you see what I mean? It's like there is, even in that instance, with all the negatives I find about, and this is one of the reasons I don't think birth control should be illegal. I don't like it.
Right.
I would prefer, if a woman asked me my personal advice, I'd be like, hey, if you must use contraception, tell them to use a condom. And maybe if you're not ready to have a baby, don't have sex. I understand it's fun. A lot of things are fun that have consequences. So maybe just wait until you're in a position where you feel like you can deal with the consequences if they do occur. That being said, if she decides not to listen to me and take birth control, I don't think that should be a crime, or that it should be like the doctor should say, sorry, that's not legal here.
Yeah,
like that.
Yeah, you touched on something interesting there. Like I without caveat disagree with the following statement. Consent to sex is consent to pregnancy. I disagree with that in every way, shape, and form. I know people, like I know a woman who actually had a situation happen that was not dissimilar to what we talked about. Basically, met a man, took active precautions to not get pregnant, and she got pregnant, and she had an abortion because she didn't find out until until she missed a cycle. So she didn't find out right away because they'd used all the precautions, and it still happened. Very low percentage. Like we were both like, man, you missed. Like I don't know how you managed to make that happen, but you're like that 1 in 100 million or something like that. Anyway, and yeah, because like all these precautions were taken, and I don't view I don't view, well, if you have sex you should be prepared to. No, I don't agree with that at all.
So see, and that's an interesting one for me because I of course strongly disagree. But like if I could argue by way of analogy, right? So I like to gamble. I'm very controlled with the way I gamble. For example, I don't play luck games. I only play games that have a degree of skill in it, like Liar's Dice or poker. And I never bet money that I couldn't flush down the toilet and not miss.
Sure.
Right.
Reasonable.
Those two things, on top of some other things I might do, are precautions against the possibility of being negatively financially impacted by gambling. Right. And there are even precautions against losing the money, right? Like, for example, if you're not familiar with poker, I can choose to fold at any point in time that I want. I can choose to check at any point in time that I want. If somebody else decides to raise, I do have to raise in order to continue to be a part of that hand, but I don't have to be a part of that hand, and I can leave at any point in time. There's no rule in poker that says you must be here until your entire buy-in is gone. You know what I mean? Because of that, poker for careful gamblers, poker is really probably the best game to play, although liar's dice is also very much a skill game. The liar's dice, technically, though, you're buying in until the end. If you withdraw from with liar's dice, you have given up your bet, or given up your buy-in at the very least, because the bet and the buy-in in liar's dice is the same thing. So I've taken a lot of precautions in there to ensure I don't actually lose that money. It's in my control to a very large extent. At the same time, it's not completely in my control. I could just get bad hand after bad hand. The deck is random, or at least so statistically anomalous that it might as well be random. I think you'd be hard-pressed to argue I have not consented to possibly lose my $20 buy-in when I decide to play poker. You know what I mean? Like, I think most people would say, if I said, man, this is stupid, and I wanted to, like, let's just make this wild scenario where it's like, hey, you need to give me my money back, man. I didn't consent to be losing all this kind of money. This is ridiculous. You'd probably be like, well, yeah, you did. You played the game. You know what I mean? And I think the
only way, I think the problem with that, the only way that analogy could carry is that if you were talking about, like, what the last number that I saw was that on average in Canada, it costs approximately $190,000 to raise a baby from infancy to age 18. So unless you're talking about a poker hand that's 200 grand, then the analogy doesn't carry through, because
even if that, let's say it was, let's use that. Let's say that I willingly had a 200 grand buy-in, and we can even extend it. Say that the 200 grand buy-in was to be paid in 20 equal installments of $2,000 a year, because if it's 190,000 over 18 years, I imagine that's really probably more like 150,000 over 10 years and then 30,000 over 8, because
maybe it depends. I mean, you spend a lot of money on diapers, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But then diapers aren't as bad as post-secondary education. So
exactly, right. So, like, it's, I guess there. Well, and you know what? Now that I think about it, that's even a fair point, because maybe there is more of an expense on the latter end that I'm giving credence to. Could totally be. But let's say that 200,000 to be paid in 20 equal installments of $2,000 a year, and I agreed to that, and then I lost. Right? I think still the vast majority of people would be like, okay, it sucks that you're now $200,000 in gambling debt, but you did not have to play poker. Yeah. I understand it's very fun, but you didn't have to do so, right? And that's kind of the same way, like, pregnancy, and really, and this is a what I would consider a biological fact that I think people just must understand. The purpose of sex, the primary function, I'll put it that way, the primary function of sex is reproduction. Yeah, if you want to talk from an evolutionary perspective or from a creationist perspective, it really doesn't matter. That's where sex comes about. Now, there are tons of secondary functions of sex.
Yeah.
It's enjoyable. It creates greater connection. It's a stress reliever. You know what I mean? I think it, when I say it creates greater connection, let me be perfectly clear. Sexless marriages are marriages where the people are not actively loving each other as much as they could be. Right?
I agree.
So, like, it's important in that sense. I also, this is a brief aside, but if you're, because I have a Christian channel, if you're watching this and you think that sex is only for reproductive purposes, that's not true. And if you're not having sex with your wife just to have sex with your wife, you're not being married correctly. I genuinely believe that. I think that's actually, it's borderline abusive, to be honest with you.
Agreed.
That aside. So, but given that that's the primary function of sex, and always will be, because if you're talking evolutionarily, that's why sex came about. And if you're talking creatively, the Bible just says so. So whichever position you take, it still is the primary function. It's like, it's really difficult for me to not say, okay, you knew the consequences, you played the game anyway, you lost.
Sure.
So, like, why is it that now I'm going to have some level of, I don't want to say sympathy, because I understand that it can be a shock and I understand that it can be a financial burden. I get all that, but sympathy to the extent of, woe is you, or let's find a way to avoid this even. It's like, I don't, it seems to me like consent to sex is more of a consent to pregnancy than it is a consent to orgasm, because quite frankly, people aren't particularly good at sex sometimes. But you don't have to be good at sex to get pregnant. You know what I mean? Like, so like I don't understand really. I guess I don't understand how it's disanalogous, the poker analogy.
I just think we disagree.
Yeah, and to be fair, that is probably, there's some truth to
Shock
that.
of all shocks. We disagree on something. We can't agree on everything, CJ. Come on.
No, I know, right?
No, no, it's fine. Yeah, we're not going to come to a meeting of the minds on everything that we talk about, right? It's interesting when you look at there's lots of studying that's been done that sex for non-procreation is prevalent in every mammalian species on Earth. Right.
That makes sense, honestly.
Pygmy chimpanzees, for example, its primary use is stress relief that you alluded to earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Like in fact, like there'll be a group of them, and if there's one that's particularly stressed out, multiple other animals will come over and kind of like take part in calming the other. Sounds silly, but take part in actively trying to calm the other one down.
Yeah.
Because they see it as a benefit to the group, right? And this is just it's documented with bonobos as well. So yeah, like we disagree. It's not the end of the world. Happens.
Yeah. Brief note. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I actually think aren't pygmy chimps and bonobos the same?
I don't know that they're 100% the same. I don't know that they're 100% the same, but I could be mistaken.
Well, and to be fair, you could also not be. I'm not sure. I quite like great apes, but
well, you're one of them, so
well, not so much bonobos though. I've studied very little about, but chimpanzees. I know this is completely random, but chimpanzees are utterly fascinating to me.
Yes, they are.
And more so than even gorillas are cool and orangutan are cool and all that, but like chimps are one of the most fascinating creatures on the planet to me.
They have very complex social structures.
Yeah, and they have very I hate to say this because I am a creationist, but there's a lot of insight into human behavior that you can get from studying chimps.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Every other great ape species, when you look at their societal structures, they won't tolerate things like theft within the group.
Mm-hmm.
They won't tolerate things like forcing themselves on others. There's very, very complex social structures with every other great ape, including us. Whether you're talking about gorillas, orangutans, gibbons, chimpanzees, or us. Those are the 5 great apes. And yeah, like it's great to see, Jane Goodall, right? Who passed just recently. She devoted her entire life to that study. And I think it's very, very interesting.
Yeah, I will really briefly. I want to point out one thing. One of the few things I do know about bonobos is that they are a matriarchal species,
mm-hmm.
And I will say, I don't know if it's too much of an analogy to compare this to humans, but I find it very fascinating that post-feminist America and the post-feminist West is very, very sexual to the point of where it's almost, it's weird to use the word immoral, but considering we use words like prude as an insult, people almost consider it immoral for women to be chaste. It's a weird way to put it, but it's like, it's at the very least, it's taboo, right? And we live in a deeply sexualized society, and it's a post-feminist America. And the the ape species that is matriarchal also is very promiscuous. And if you compare that to chimps who are patriarchal, they tend to be, with the exception that they are polygamous rather than monogamous, they tend to be very sexually controlled. And I do find that to be very fascinating. And I don't know if that's too much of an application to compare, but it's like, it immediately struck me how bizarrely similar that is.
Yeah, I look at it as an interesting factoid for sure.
Yeah. At any rate, we're pressed for time at the moment, is that right?
Yeah, we are kind of. I mean, I sent a note off. I bought myself an extra half hour, so I bought myself about another 10 minutes.
Okay.
So
let's go ahead and end with one brief point then here.
Sure.
Which is as it pertains to this topic that we are in such vehement agreement on. Hypothetically, let's say that we were in a situation where, because you pointed out, you said, I think less abortion is better.
Mm-hmm.
Let's do a thought experiment. If I could create the medical technology necessary to have a 100% success rate from conception, removing the embryo from a woman and growing in him or her in a lab, would at that point, do you think it would be reasonable to make abortion illegal?
That's an interesting question, because in one sense, you've met my criteria, for, kind of, abortion being less favorable. But I would still have to err on the side of, like I said, my pro-life stance is only overshadowed by my pro-choice stance, and that is a woman's ability to choose. So I would say no, still don't make it illegal. And my hope for humanity would be that you would be able to persuade a woman in that situation to give that potential human life a chance.
See, now, and the reason I asked that is because I sort of anticipated that answer. And I think that now there are charitable and discharitable ways to look at that. Of course, the discharitable way would be to say, see, it's not really about the autonomy of the pregnancy or some of the different talking points. It's more about the right to terminate, right? And I think probably the more charitable way would be, no, it's more the right of the female to have autonomy over their own body.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I think and I think it's fair. I think it's fair that you, at minimum, highlight both of those, because if I put I was a Christian for a long time. If I put my Christian hat back on, then your uncharitable response is exactly what I would have said.
Right.
As a former Christian, it's exactly what I would have said. Was it really about that? Because it sounds like it, but it's not. But, and I think the only difference would be in the charitable response is the essence, if you'll forgive the word, of the argument, in that it still has to be her choice to do it. And that's where I would try to use empathy and compassion to plead with the individuals to still do that. And I want to believe, I really want to believe, and I'm not quite sure. It's you pose a very interesting question that I'm going to have to really give some serious thought on, because I want to believe that more women would be like, okay, sure. But I think there would still be some cases, like we talked about before in the instances particularly of assault, where I think you would run into the scenario, and I think it's understandable given the terrible situation that woman had been put in the first place, that the preservation of life is probably not going to be top of that particular woman's list. It's going to be like, this was the result of an assault I had no say in. I just want it gone. Don't know, don't care. Get it out. And not to be too crass, but, give me a plunger and I'll do it myself, kind of thing. But I would think that in other situations, like maybe the broken condom, maybe the, whatever, pick another scenario. I would like to hope, social worker that I am, that I would be able to be persuasive in giving life a chance.
See, and now 2 quick things. First off, no problem with using essence. I'm a philosopher, so we use that all the time. And now that I'm actually being educated for it, I can say that. It used to be just everybody's a philosopher kind of thing. But anyways, that aside, jokes aside. So I think this really gets to one of the, there's multiple stones in the foundation of this argument, or its dispute, whatever you'd like to call it. And I think that really does get to one of the cores of it, which is for me and for the vast majority of people who will argue like me. I will never claim to speak for all because there's exceptions, it seems, to every rule. The preservation of life is the most important thing that is the most important category, right? And we should caveat that with the preservation of innocent life. I don't particularly love when people say like, oh, you're against abortion, but you're for the death penalty. It's like, right, because I just don't think that, rapists should be allowed to continue to walk free, and babies hypothetically don't do that. That being said, and it appears to me like this idea of autonomy is the primary point for people who would be more on the pro-choice side. And I think we started this whole thing talking about like this idea of household voting and units and stuff like that. And part of the reason my political philosophy has shifted more towards the traditionalist style of conservatism is I just don't know how much I value autonomy in its etymological sense, autonomos, a law unto yourself, right? To an extent, I do, of course. I still firmly believe in like the U.S. Constitution, for example. Mankind has rights that I believe are inherent, even. But like, I also question an unfettered autonomy. Like, I think that to be a law unto yourself is essentially to have no law. You know what I mean? And in a lot of these instances, I know people might say, okay, yeah, that's the etymological root of autonomy, but that's not necessarily what we mean. But it kind of is, right? Because we're talking about now a situation where we can grant that it's the deliberate taking of an innocent human life, and we can grant that it's possible to have such a reasonable alternative that it has a 100% success rate, right? And yet still, because of this idea of being a law unto yourself, we can allow it to be permissible. And it's like, I just don't know how much I value that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And it goes, and maybe this will be the jumping point for part 3 of this, in that if you remember back to the Facebook post that we shared back and forth, we had talked about, like, it was in this vein. And I had asked you what rights you were prepared to sacrifice. Like if you were asking for half of the species, women, to be denied their autonomy in this instance, what are you willing to give up? And I think that's part of it. And that, like the law unto yourself, we all understand, generally speaking, again, present company accepted and psychopaths excluded, those who actually derive pleasure from the pain of others.
Right.
We understand that, the coalescing into society necessitates altruistic behaviors, right? And working together to achieve common goals. So there's only so much we're actually, until we get so far into the abstract that we can start pondering these somewhat nonsensical things, because when we talk about law unto ourselves, well, then we're foregoing the fact that we're living in, where we're trying to be a cohesive society, right? So we have, there has to be certain starting blocks that we include in our point. But I think the last thing that I would say is, like, if we're talking especially about the formation of laws, you're familiar, of course, with the philosopher John Rawls and his veil of ignorance, right?
Absolutely.
I think that would be the last thing, right? Because we have to, the best way for anyone not familiar, essentially this idea of the veil of ignorance is, if you're going to set up a society, you set up all the rules of the society, not very specifically, not knowing what position you will hold. And that is the best way to ensure equality for everyone.
Really quickly, just to be very clear, what Michael is saying is the position you will hold in society. So you set up society in such a way that you don't know whether or not you'll be the impoverished lower class guy or born into an aristocracy or anything in between. Yeah.
So, but I think that's a decent place to push pause, and that could be, if you agree, it could be a decent jumping point for part 3.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it would be a fantastic point for a part 3, and hopefully we'll be able to. My streaming count has plummeted in the recent couple months. I'm not sure why, but hopefully this will help to spark it back up a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The last thing I wanted to say, and I say this either at the beginning or end of every stream that you and I do together. So forgive me for those of you who have heard me say this before. So what just happened? Well, if I look at that, it looks like we've been going about 2 hours, pretty close to 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So what everybody just saw was 2 people who could not be more opposed from a general and even specific worldview perspective. CJ being a fundamentalist Christian and me being an atheist. And I take the strong part. Like, I believe gods don't exist. So I'm not just I don't believe. I'm the strong version of the atheist. And never once did we attack each other, get nasty, insult, or anything else. And wouldn't it be nice if we could all do that? There's probably somebody watching this right now that's either on my side of the fence or on CJ's side of the fence, who is aware of an interaction that they had where they could have been a better human. And so if the only thing you take away, I mean, after the 2-hour discussion, some pretty weighty topics, I'm sure CJ and I both hope that you take away more than this. But if all you're going to do is take away the fact that 2 people had a conversation and weren't jerks to each other, at least take that away. Thanks, CJ.
Absolutely. And I will end with, first off, an agreement on that. Because one of the things I find particularly positive about my relationship with Michael is that not only are we coming at it from complete disagreement, but we're also not pulling punches, right? Like, I haven't at any point said, oh, no, actually, I don't want, I want to soften this and say that I don't think it's murder. And at the same time, you've at no point, said anything besides the fact that, like, for example, the household voting thing would disenfranchise half the population. And you can have respectful dialogue that is still honest. So that's one thing I'd like to point out there as well. With that, I will just say, thank you guys for watching. If you are here, please remember to like and share this video and consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so. Hit the bell to get notified every time we go live. Remember, you can leave questions, comments, criticisms, concerns, critiques, or anything of that nature in the comment section down below. If you'd like to support the work that we do here, you can do so in numerous ways. Super chat, super stickers, super thanks are always welcome. Subscribe to the Patreon for $5 monthly, and you will get access to my breakfast tea video blogs. So some extra content for those of you guys who like it. I have a book in the description. I have a paper in the description that won't allow you to contribute to anything, but you can still read it anyway. And a PayPal if you guys want to give a one-time donation there. And we certainly appreciate anybody who is contributing, because we're getting to a point where, you know, I've been wanting to be a full-time academic. I'll have my associates by the end of the summer. And that means I will be able to have my first academic job, albeit not as an academic myself. I've also submitted a book proposal to Canon Press, which means, at least in the popular sense, academia is probably pretty close here. So, but we can't, of course, do any of that without your guys' support. So I know sometimes it might be annoying to hear podcasters and YouTubers ask for your money. The only way we can continue to give more high quality content is if you guys decide to support. So for those of you who do, thank you very much. And for those of you who want to, thank you for your consideration. Please do consider that. I would be grateful immensely. Also, I have a link to my guests in the description below as well. So if you want to check out more from the Canadian Atheist, there is a link to his podcast down below. There are, I think, 218 episodes. 224 now. 224.
Yep.
You know what's funny is I listened to the last one, so I should have known that. Yeah, if you guys want to check that out, I think there's always interesting content over there. Of course, understand that he's coming from a different perspective than we are, but also, I mean, you're clearly watching this video, so you're clearly not too bothered by that.
Yeah, I don't want your money. I'm independently wealthy. I'm just kidding. But no, we don't, Dean and I, the other half of the show, we don't monetize the podcast at all. If you want to support somebody, help CJ out.
Greatly appreciate that. With that, friends, we are out of here. If the Lord wills and tarries, we'll be with you guys here very soon with another episode of Un-Apologetics. I'm not sure on what topic yet, but nevertheless, shalom, and God bless you guys.
Cheers.
I said, won't it be a time?